my very rudimentary understanding is that, and from our discussions, is that pneumatics, that was compressed air being pushed through piping, was initially how some of these systems were in conversation with one another. Is that correct?
Yes, the pneumatic operators were simply a diaphragm and a bellows that operated the diaphragm that moved against a spring to open and close either a damper actuator or a valve actuator, and a fairly simple device. And the pneumatic thermostat was a little more complicated, but the two of them were much less expensive than the electric thermostats that we had, primarily because the actuators that for the electric systems had a gear system that would there would be 5 or 6 gears that would gear down the electric motor RPM down to a very slow motion, and these were expensive to produce. Barber-Coleman finally, after the semiconductor industry started to develop microprocessors, they developed an electronic thermostat and a very inexpensive actuator that didn't have all these gear trains. They used a little oil pump within the actuator, and the cost of the product to us was less than half it had been before. So that's what really put us into very competitive business against pneumatic.
When was it that these that the silicon revolution happened that enabled these actuators to become smaller and more affordable? Around what time?
Well, this would have been in the early 60s.
Okay. So it seems like there's a real revolution both in what Barber-Coleman can offer and then what Yama's company was able to offer around that time period.
Yeah, and there was also a revolution going on in the industry that the first few years that we were in business were very challenging, also exciting, but very challenging. And over the years, things developed that were very much in our favor, as we just described. For instance, the engineers who had, there were just a handful of engineers in San Francisco, and they had all this experience with the pneumatic control manufacturers, and we had a hard time breaking in with them. Mm-hmm. Suddenly, a lot of their employees started to go out and form businesses of their own, and with that group, we were on an equal footing with any of the others. And also the type of systems were changing. The piping air conditioning had been primarily a piping operation, and it developed more into an air operation. So as the sheet metal contractors started to get more power against the piping contractors who were allied and some contracting to them. And as this happened, it also opened things more up for us.
Take me back to those early days. You said they were exciting, they were challenging. You had mentioned just a bit ago that there was just the three of you initially, you, George, Don, and but within a few short years, it sounded like you had half a dozen engineers once George had kind of decided to go on his own.
Right.
Tell me about that process of growth, because you eventually took this company from the three of you to having in one office in San Francisco to having offices spread across California, a couple offices in Nevada, some 250 employees over the next few decades. From those three initial people that was you, George, and Don at the beginning in the early 50s, how did you make that growth happen? How did you even just get those first engineers?
We did is we started hiring. We decided to install our own controls. The pneumatic manufacturers installed their own pneumatic controls. Honeywell was the only other manufacturer who made electric controls, and they did not install them. So we started to, first thing we did is we started hiring field personnel to actually install the systems that we were bidding on and getting contracts on. And so we got installation managers and started hiring several field engineers to actually handle the field work. And union electricians to actually do the actual installation. And so that this, over the years, and then we started hiring more salesmen, and the whole thing just ballooned up.